Hello friends, and welcome to today's video. In today's video, we are going to be talking about the history of Balisong and or how Balisong has changed over the period of time that I have been in the hobby. I've been in the hobby since around 2014. That's the year that I started kind of getting into flipping. And then I started really taking it seriously, I would say 2016. So, that's when I made my Instagram account. I really started collecting more and I started getting all the stuff. But I've been in the hobby for a minute, and I know a lot about the history of the hobby as well, because I did a lot of research when I was first getting in, and since then, just to kind of keep myself up on the, how everything has worked and how everything does work. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of Balisongs over the years and maybe give you a little bit of context for when, you're looking at the current Balisong market and you're seeing what's available and how things are and stuff like that. Maybe you'll have a little more context when it comes to, where things have been versus where they are now. So, I think let's just jump right into that. So obviously I'm flipping my alien right now, but that's kind of outside the scope of this thing. The alien represents a part which is the boutique knife maker's space, right? This is made by one dude. There's many knives that are like this that are made by just one person. They're art, they're works of art. They're very specific. And the big thing is that they're kind of outside of the history of Balisong. There are people who are boutique makers that have been around for a long time and have been making, stuff that has changed the Balisong market. But what I'm talking about today are specifically kind of where production knives were. So custom knives are kind of out of the equation here. We're really trying to talk about specifically knives that anyone could buy and not crazy expensive stuff. So to get into that, we're going to start down here. These are my first two Balisongs ever. These guys are just something else. They're kind of cool, kind of crazy. What they are is really, really cheap Chinese crap. Like, they are basically what Balisongs were for a long time for people in the US. Like, if you wanted to get something, this is what you would find at any store around you. I got these. I lived in Denton, Texas, and I got these at a place called the Downtown Mini Mall. You guys might remember that if anybody is from Denton, Texas, or knows about Denton, Texas. The Downtown Mini Mall burned down, and now there's only the Downtown Mini Mall 2. So I got these from the Downtown Mini Mall, and they suck. They're terrible. They're really, really bad. But this is how it was back in the day, right? This is basically the only option for a lot of people. And the way that they would work is essentially it is a really cheap steel. It says stainless steel on it, but who knows what steel that could be. It's almost definitely cast, much like the handles. It's at least, really, really shitty steel. If it isn't cast, it's stamped. It's completely dull. There's no edge to this at all. And it was sold as a live blade knife, but it's completely dull, and it's been dull the day I got it. The pins in it are made of brass, which is really soft. So these guys, you can see it doesn't actually have screws at all. It's completely screwless. It works off of pins, and that's how a lot of cheap knives worked back in the day, was off of pins, right? And the handles are made out of cast material. I have no idea what metal they used to cast this, but it's literally just a cast metal that they then basically paint or coat in some sort of metallic coating, and that's how they get this finish. But they are produced so cheaply, and they're completely unadjustable. Like, I can flip mine now, but it feels like shit to flip. It's really, really bad. The balance is horrific. They're terrible. They're just really, really disgusting. But this is what I had back in the day. These were my first two Balisongs that I got from a local store. The pin on this, like the tang pin you can see, is also made of brass, which is a problem because brass is very soft. And also this cast metal, I'm sure, is also very soft. So you can see the tang pin barely exists to do anything. These slap no matter what you do. They started slapping, I think, the moment I got them out of the store. Like, the tang pin basically doesn't exist. So yeah, this is where I started, and this is where a lot of people started back in the day, because this was the only option. These really, really terrible, really shitty things. And then, moving up from there, you have a more modern Balisong. And so this is kind of funny, right? This video was inspired by my friend Sergel, who actually got me this Baron's Son cutlery knife for Christmas as, just to get it for me, and also kind of as a sweet present, kind of as a joke, because it's terrible. It's really bad. Like, and I've known about this. Bear & Son for a long time has made Balisongs, but their Balisongs are barely more than what this is. They really are. Like, they've made a couple that are okay, but most of the Bear & Son Balisongs I would not suggest to anybody. And the reason for that is, A, you can see it's on pins. You know, it's probably a better steel, but I don't know what the steel is because it doesn't say on the blade. Let's see, does it say on here? It's a 5-inch butterfly orange. Yeah, it does not say what steel it is. So, I have no idea what steel it is. I do know it is sharp, so this one did actually come sharp. But, that doesn't matter because the knife doesn't move. The knife it has pins, and so because of that, what they do... Ooh, that almost cut me. Because of the pins, what they do... Look at this shit. Oh my god, that is so sad. It's just... It doesn't even want to move. Because it's on pins, the pins will loosen over time, right? Like, the more you flip it, the more the pins will loosen. So what they do is they send it to you really tight so that the tolerances of the knife are kind of... They're not great, but they're okay. If I check the play, the play's not very bad at all, right? Like, it's actually got kind of good play. And the reason for that is because they crush the shit out of it with these pins. And so you can't actually flip it because it just sticks. It's just completely stuck. Like, I can't even begin to try to actually do tricks on this thing without fear of like really cutting myself badly because of how stuck the pins are, right? They're just super tight. And so, yeah, really this, I mean, if you look at it, it's very obvious that it's an almost, exactly the same kind of design. You've got this one pin there, you've got these pins holding it together, you've got one pin holding this floppy latch in, and that's the only thing doing that. Like, it's really barely a step above these things that you can buy for $5 at like a convenience store, but it's sold by Bear & Sons for more money than that, which is stupid. So don't buy these. But this is what we were working with back in the day, right? Like, this is what I'm trying to get at, is that, like, we didn't have any of this fancy shit that I'm going to get to. We had these. This is what the majority of the market was. And when it wasn't one of these, it was one of these, right? So this is the Benchmade 42. This is a clone of the Benchmade 42. This is the one clone off of AliExpress. And honestly, I think it's better than the original 42. The original 42, the problem with it is that it runs exclusively on washers. Well, that, and it's impossible to find. You cannot buy a Benchmade 42. You have to buy a clone, unless you want to spend upwards of $600 on a knife that originally sold for less than $200. So, that's kind of crazy. The Benchmade 42 is one of the only knives that I highly suggest you buy the clone of and not the original. Now, you can see this has the single tang pin right there, and then it uses this blade stop to keep the handle from touching the blade. So it uses that as a stop to keep the blade from hitting the inside of the handle. This knife is basically what all of these other knives are based off of. The Benchmade 42, or the 4X series, takes its inspiration from the other Benchmade knives that came before it, but the 4X series was really what made Balisong knives prolific in the United States in the 90s. And so the Benchmade 42 is a fantastic knife because it has these titanium channel handles. Originally, these were cast because it was cheaper at the time to cast titanium than it was to machine it. So what they did is they created a mold, and then they injected molten titanium into that mold. And so an original Benchmade 42, one way you can tell is that if you look at the inside of the handle to see whether or not it's a clone, if you see any kind of milling marks inside of the handle, it's guaranteed to be a clone because they did not mill the handles at all. The handles on the Benchmade 42 were not milled, they were cast. So now obviously on mine it has the one logo. I highly prefer getting knives that are clones that have a logo of the cloning company instead of the original manufacturer of the knife, because I really hate them copying it and then trying to like act like it's original. That sucks. But this is the one 42, and this is what people had. If you were really into Balisongs at the time, the Benchmade 42 was like the thing to have. It had 440C steel, it had really nice titanium handles, but it only ran off of washers. Once again, much like all of these knives, it only had washers. And washers worked perfectly fine, but nowadays, if you're going to pay upwards of $600 for a Benchmade 42, you've got to realize you're going to get a knife that will slap really badly, and it'll be only on washers, and there's nothing you can do about that. Like, that's just something you're going to have to accept. On the clone version, it does come on bushings, and if I was to tighten this right now, we would be able to get the tap out of it. But currently, it is completely and totally loose, which honestly feels really good on the 42, because if I'm being honest, the 42 was kind of meant to flip really loose with tap, because, you know, that's just history, baby. That's what God intended for the 42. So yeah, it's a really good flipper, especially, you know, it's prolific, it's legendary nowadays, but this was like the cream of the crop at the time. There really wasn't much else. You know, you had the 42, and then you had just utter shit, right? There was like really, really little in the way of actually usable balisongs. And then, guess what? They discontinued the 42. Gone. See ya, fucker. So now you can't have this anymore. Now you get to have one of these, a Benchmade 51. Except it doesn't look like this. This is a very pretty, very nice Benchmade 51. It's running on bushings. It's got these beautiful titanium scales. No, 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 no. You get a Benchmade 51 made with titanium liners. It has G10 scales, so it's just plastic scales, essentially. And then you get no bushings. You just get washers. Merry Christmas. You just get washers. It's going to have a lot of tap. It's going to have a lot of blade rub, because if you want to get it to the, you know, looseness where it will flip properly, it's going to have a lot of blade rub and tap, and so that sucks to be you. Also, it's super light. Sorry, you know how you really like the balance of this one? That's too bad. So yeah, Merry Christmas. Enjoy your 51. Happy New Year. So yeah, that sucked at the time. It was like, okay, suddenly all this great, you know, the great flipping thing is gone, and it skyrockets in price, and now you have the Benchmade 32 and 52, or 31 and 51, whatever, and they just don't work. It's not the same. It's not as good. It just kind of sucks, and that sucks. It's a bad time. I don't like that. And that's what we kind of had to deal with, you know, at this time period. Thankfully, a bunch of companies came around, like Flytanium and EDC Gunner, to create these wonderful mods. And so at the time, a modding community sprouted around these knives. You had people creating things like these Space Invaders. I have custom carbon fiber inlay scales here. These are all made by people who had a passion for balisongs. And unfortunately, this is one of the reasons that all of the stuff for modding 51s has become exceedingly rare nowadays. Nowadays, it's very hard to come across a 51 that isn't modded, but it's also very hard to come across the mods for a new 51. Say if you were to buy a 51, you know, I made in my review, I talked about how I really like the 51 in terms of its modability. Well, nowadays, there's barely any people making mods for it. And the reason for that is we've got all of this now. You know, when you can buy a Cracker-Akin for $250, why would you spend more than $400 modifying your 51 into something glorious, you know, that will not flip as good as your Cracker-Akin at the end of the day? Like, no matter what you do to the 51, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be as good. And so that was kind of what we were stuck with. It was pretty cool because of the community that sprouted up around it and the people, you know, trying to develop mods for it. But it wasn't the best. You know, it was still a pretty struggling time in terms of the Balisong community. Around that time, you also had newer makers start to show up, people like Atropos here. Atropos started creating knives a pretty long time ago at this point, and you know, his stuff is pretty good. You know, they're handmade knives from Russia. It's, you know, he makes them with titanium channel design handles. He makes all sorts of different kinds of stuff now, but at the time, really, it was just there was the Atropos Demon, and that was like the main thing that he was known for. Unfortunately, at the time, though, this is after he started releasing them, so you can see this one has Zen pins. This one is really high quality. Like, there's no tap in it currently, and you can tune it to absolutely zero play, and that was not the case originally. Originally, the Atropos stuff was very similar in quality to the Benchmade 42. Some of it didn't have bushings, some of it would just be on washers. It would always come with really bad play, really bad tap. It wasn't wasn't very good. And the reason for that was just because the processes have gotten more developed nowadays. Nowadays, it's much easier for companies to produce things that are higher quality, and so Atropos does so. He's changed how he makes his stuff. But back in the day, the original Atropos wasn't super well regarded in the Balisong community because the quality just wasn't really there. They were cool knives, and they were really nice to have, but the quality just didn't exist. Similarly, around the same time that Atropos came onto the scene, we started to get stuff from Squid. So Squid Industries is an interesting one. Nowadays, people, they see Squid Industries and they're like, oh yeah, the big Balisong company. Squid Industries is, if I had to guess, they're probably one of the largest Balisong specific companies, if not the largest company producing specifically Balisongs in terms of their overall revenue and product line. They have a lot of products that they're constantly making, and they're doing their best to keep that going. And so I'm sure they make a shit ton of money off of the Balisong hobby, producing products for it. But it's very easy to get caught up in that now, looking at Squid Industries and being like, oh yeah, they're like, this large company that's doing this crazy stuff. But if you go watch my videos that we made on the main channel about Squid Industries, you'd know that they have like 20 employees at the end of the day, and like they're not really that big of a company. They're just a few dudes who like to build Balisongs, but they are a company. But the thing to know is that Squid Industries is called that because of Lucas, because of Squidmaster. He created the first Squid Trainer, because back in the day he was on Reddit. He got into the Balisong hobby around this time, right, when there was just jack shit available. And so he had a really cheap China knife, and like he was like, this sucks, and I want to make something to fill this role, because at the time the only stuff that was available, and this was so very important, was that the only stuff that was available was stuff that was expensive. You could only buy shitty knives, or you could buy like a Kimura, which is it's kind of like the Lucha is now, except it was only on washers and it was made of steel, and like that was the only things available for you to buy. And so Lucas thought, you know what, I want to try to create something for people who can't afford some of the more expensive knives, but is also going to be a really good trainer to flip. And so that's when he ended up creating this. This is the Squid Trainer, and you can see mine has tap right now, but if I was to tighten it at all, I could easily get the tap out, because the tolerances, even though this is only on washers, the tolerances are so tight that if you just adjust it properly, you can take out all of the tap and play, and it still has fantastic swing. This is my 2.5 version Squid Trainer, but back in the day he created the version 1, the original Squid Trainer, and that thing was just, it was revolutionary for the Balisong community, right? Because nobody had done anything like that yet. Nobody had taken the time to really make a boutique knife that was on a small scale like that, and so he was literally making them out of his parents' garage, and like, and so this was a big turning point in the Balisong community. He was the first person to come up with the idea of these aluminum channel handles. Nobody thought that that was a good idea until he did it. And also, he was the one to come up with like this trainer design and the idea of having a whole business around trainers. There weren't very many trainers at all in the hobby up until that point. I think Jerry Holmes' Prodigy was one of the first, good quality trainers, because the problem was the only trainers that really existed, you could get all these knives, but these were really like, this level of quality was the only trainers available. The only good trainer you could buy for a long time was something about that quality, not this quality. So this was a revolution for the Balisong community, and I think is part of what led to how prolific the Balisong community is nowadays. And so in the time since, and we've evolved through all of these, we've come to this area. So Maxace, this is my Maxace Covenant V2. I had a Covenant V1, and then I sold that, and then I recently bought this V2, and I really like it. The Maxace Covenant kind of shows a turning point in the Balisong community and industry because Maxace had come onto the scene and they had made a few things. And the Covenant really was the first time a Chinese company made something that was really, really compelling. You know, you have this company out of China called Maxace, and they made something extremely compelling to the Balisong community. You know, it's a good flipper that does good stuff, and that was really important to a lot of people. You know, that's something that we had been waiting for a long time, and currently the only thing coming out of China was either really cheap China crap or direct clones. And so Maxace coming onto the scene with stuff like this was very, very nice to see, and was a big, you know, push in terms of getting Balisongs that are good quality in the hands of more people. And then from there, you know, we finally have the Crackerakin. The Crackerakin was the first time anyone ever took a live bladed design and put it onto aluminum channel handles. And nowadays, you know, you'll see almost every knife has an aluminum channel handle design. You'll find the Balisong Z has aluminum channel handles. You've got Machine Wise making aluminum channel handles. NRB, Atropos, tons of people have adopted the aluminum channel handle design. BRS, Flytanium, like, you know, but back in the day, this was crazy. People were like, when it was this, they were like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Like, they gave him shit for it, but at the same time, they were like, yeah, it's supposed to be cheap, so the aluminum's fine, right? It's supposed to be a cheap trainer. Nobody's expecting to, like, need to do work with it, so, you know what, that's fine. People eventually agreed that that was a good design. But then Lucas came out with this, and people were like, no, absolutely not. You're gonna put a fucking live blade on some aluminum handles? What are you thinking? You're insane. And so he got a bunch of backlash for this design, and now it's like the standard design for most, you know, affordable knives in the industry entirely, right? Like, that's craziness, that something that got so much backlash back in the day eventually ended up being something that has the most proliferation. That is a hard word to pronounce, proliferation. It has the most proliferation in the industry as a design, right? It's very, very impressive. You know, it's kind of interesting thinking about the history of Squid, because he really has weirdly shaped the flow of the Balisong community as a whole ever since he came in, so that's kind of neat. But regardless, the Crackerakin is honestly one of the best production flipping knives, and it's regarded that way by the community at large for a reason. But it's important to look back and remember that, like, this thing was not super well received by people at the time. You know, this was like not the the pinnacle of whatever that, like, people thought it could be. Ooh. And so finally we have this. You know, this is the Kershaw Lucha, and this is the knife that I think really marked the turning point for the Balisong community, where up until this point, even the Crackerakin, Balisongs were a smaller thing. Especially back in the day, there were very few people interested in them, and then slowly more and more people became interested in them, and then around the time that Squid Industries came into it, now you had the ability of making more knives, more companies are coming in, and now that the Crackerakin existed, there's a million people who have looked at this and been inspired and been like, I could make a knife using similar technology in a similar way, and suddenly you have a million people jumping into the scene and creating millions and millions of awesome different designs and knives. There's so many makers, there's new people coming all of the time, and that's what's crazy about all of this, right? You have people like Machine Wise jumping into the industry, you have NRB doing all sorts of cool stuff. Like, there's a lot. Svix, when Svix was around, there's a lot of cool stuff that's been happening in the Balisong community as of recent, and the thing that really marked the Balisong community peaking, or at least like on its way up, really was this, the Kershaw Lucha. A company like Kershaw, you know, having a similar pull in terms of their overall market cap to Benchmade, you know, they're a very, very large knife company, them being like, you know what, I think it's time that we produced a Balisong, and we're going to make it good enough that you can flip it, stock, and be pretty happy with it, and it's going to be available in, like, Walmart. You know, you could go to almost any knife shop in the United States in places where Balisongs are legal and find a Kershaw Lucha if you look hard enough. You know, Kershaw sells their products in freaking Walmarts. And you might not find a Lucha there, but, you know, you're going to find Kershaw products. If you go to a knife-specific shop, there's almost a guarantee that you'll be able to find a Kershaw Lucha nowadays. And that's craziness, right? Like, we've come so far from Balisongs being completely unknown things that very few people practice to having stuff like the Kershaw Lucha, where you can go into a store today in your hometown and potentially find one and pay less than $200 to have it. And then there's a whole market behind the Kershaw Lucha for mods like these Flytanium V1 replacement hardware. You know, these guys completely replaced the handles. Woo, that was a big one. It dang poked me. This is the guy that gave me my worst cut, by the way, on the same finger, actually, that I just stabbed myself, but I'm not bleeding, so that's good. But yeah, I'll talk about my worst cut someday. It's not actually that bad. I haven't been cut very badly because I'm generally careful, but that's not related to this. Either way, I think this is a very cool, you know, marker for the Balisong industry because, like, right, it's made by a big company. It's a knife that's available to everybody. Like, this is super cool. This is crazy stuff. And the fact that this exists is a, you know, testament to how far we have come as the Balisong community as a whole, right? The Balisong flipping hobby really has taken off and become more of a mainstream thing. You know, there's more and more people interested in Balisongs every single day, and I think that's really cool. I think it's also kind of interesting to think about the fact that the crossover between people in the knife community and the Balisong community is a lot less than you'd think. Because, like, obviously it's like, oh yeah, Balisongs are knives, so people in the Balisong community like knives, which is true to a degree, but I've found, weirdly, a lot of the people in the Balisong community don't really care at all about regular folding knives. Like, most people in the Balisong community, there are some who like both, but most people in the Balisong community really more care about the Balisongs because of the flipping aspect. So at the end of the day, you can see the trajectory. You know, we've gone from knives that they're operational, I can cut something with this, but I can't flip it, to knives where they're both operational and incredible flippers. We really have, you know, gone insane ways to making our knives very, very flippable and very usable in terms of the art that we practice, which is flipping. And so, yeah, that's kind of the history of Balisongs here. You know, that's the idea behind all of this, is like Balisongs have changed a lot over time, and this is where we are now. We're at a point where there are large companies who are like big corporations creating Balisongs that you can buy across the US, and I think that's pretty freaking cool. I'm hoping that the changes in the future are stuff like, I hope to see more and more people deciding to make their own Balisongs as we go along. You know, that's something that has been happening and I hope continues to happen, because the more people that are on the market making Balisongs, the more Balisongs are available for people to buy, and that's, you know, fantastic for the community as a whole. On top of that, I really hope that the Balisong community becomes more worldwide in terms of accessibility, right? Because most of the Balisongs that are out there are produced in the US. And so that leads to a big problem for people who are overseas. And so I'm very hopeful that over time, you know, it'll become easier for people overseas to acquire these knives. I believe the Kershaw Lucha is something that you can get elsewhere because of Kershaw's power. It's made in the US, but they do ship worldwide to stores. So I know they do have stores in other countries that carry their products that you might be able to get a Kershaw Lucha at. Other than that, Maxace is a fantastic company for worldwide distribution because they're coming from China, so they can basically ship literally anywhere in the world utilizing the DHL shipping methods on AliExpress. And so you can get a knife shipped to you, and it won't take, you know, much longer than it would take to get anywhere else, because, you know, the distance is going to be pretty similar and the shipping times are going to be pretty congruent all over the place. So if you live in a country outside of the US, Maxace is always a fantastic option. Outside of that also is, you know, Atropost. They're in Russia, and they can also ship pretty universally across the world. They actually have some trouble shipping to the United States because of Russia. So between these options, I do think there is a growing community worldwide and a growing availability for Balisongs worldwide. But that's something that I really hope becomes more prolific in the future. You know, being able to see more of these Balisongs across the entire world would be really cool, because the Balisong community being limited, the majority of the Balisong community being limited to America kind of sucks. You know, I really want more people to be able to have more knives, and so I think we are on our way towards that, but for right now, it is majority American, knives that are either made in America or produced in America, put together in America, and then a lot of the collectors that have them live in America. So if you're outside and you're trying to buy a knife from a collector who's selling it on Instagram or something, you're still going to have a hard time because then you have to convince them to ship it, overseas, and some people are reluctant to do that. So that's just my hope, is that in the future the Balisong community becomes more worldwide, and the worldwide accessibility of Balisongs increases. But yeah, this is a long one, sorry about that, but I hope you guys learned something. This has been the history of Balisongs, a very loose history, but a history nonetheless. And I hope this gives you some context when it comes to, why Balisongs are the way they are, why, nowadays, we're super lucky to be where we are. We are in a Balisong renaissance with how many makers are popping up all of the time, with how many new Balisongs are being produced all of the time. The availability of Balisongs is better than it has ever been. And so while I know it seems like a struggle sometimes for people out there who are trying to get a knife and it's, the knives drop and suddenly they're all gone and you don't get it, just know that the Balisong community as a whole is getting better and bigger and, more strong continuously. And so in the future, we are easily on a trajectory to where everybody should be able to have whatever knife they want pretty much continuously. We are steadily climbing towards that peak. We are working our way up there, because from where we were to where we are now is such a substantial difference that I think it's honestly impossible that we don't reach that peak eventually. So yeah, that's my rant. I hope you guys had a good time listening to it, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. I will see you later. Peace.